Hi Tracy. Hi everyone who's listening to the podcast.
Today, I want to interview Ross and talking about something related to teaching young learners. So recently, I'm running a course, and
What's the course?
So it's the Trinity Cert TESOL, and we have half teachers teaching kids and teens, and half teachers teaching adults. But I know you have a lot of teaching experience teaching young learners.
Quite a lot.
Yeah, so I really want you to give some good advice and suggestions on how to manage their behavior in the class and how to motivate the young learners.
Well, the main mistake that I find that teachers make is that they tend to focus on bad behavior and not on good behavior. So I think there's some theory somewhere about like kids basically want adults' attention. So when they're in a room with adults, they want to get the adults' attention, right? And one of the main ways that kids do this is they behave badly. And then every time that happens and the teacher reacts to it, they give that student attention. And then they're like reinforcing that every time you behave badly,
Oh, I see.
you're giving me attention, right?
Okay.
What that also does is it shows the students who are behaving well, the way to get my attention is to behave badly.
I want to ask you a question. How can you give some specific examples how you pay attention to the students who behave well?
Yeah, right. Okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. So I guess the thing you're trying to do, right, is focus on the well-behaved students, not the badly behaved students. So, for example, I remember teaching a class a few years ago, and I don't know, like if the students start to get rowdy. So with students who are maybe like 7 to 11 or so, I always put them into two teams, and then give them points depending on how well they behave in the class and how many questions they try and answer, that kind of thing, right? So when you get into this thing of this one group or all the students are being too noisy, I'll say, oh, who's the quietest student in the class, right? And you say it really, really quietly, and then you walk around and you're pretending to listen to all the students, and you go, oh, well done, you're very quiet, your team can get a point, or whatever, right? Or if it's with younger students, you can like high five them or something, or do something to praise them in some way. And you don't tell off the students that are badly behaved. You just give more attention to the students that are being well behaved.
But well, based on my experience and I observe
so tell us a bit about your experience, because you've obviously you have taught kids before as well, but your experience is quite different to mine.
So I remember I was teaching the summer course, and that's a course specifically for oral English contest. So you have to prepare a lot of things, and I did what you said and pay attention to the students who behave really well. But I feel it's really hard for me to balance if I should praise or do a lot of things to encourage the good behavior. And how can I balance if I should punish the bad behavior students?
Sound like you need a drink of water.
Okay.
Even just thinking about bad behaviors made your throat dry. So apparently there's some ratio that you need of praise to punishment. And that they say the magic ratio is something like 7 to 1, right? And apparently they found the same ratio in lots of other things, right? So successful businesses, or successful teams in business, the ratio of like positive feedback to negative feedback is also something like 10 to 1 or 7 to 1. So they find that if you only give positive reinforcement in business, then the teams don't perform very well. Because you only ever say, oh, well done, good job, you're so awesome, right? But sometimes you do need to tell people you're doing something wrong. But equally, those teams in business, if they only ever said negative things to them, to each other, then those teams didn't perform very well either. And apparently it's the same with marriage. I read 8 years ago about some study someone did. Have you read about this before or heard about this? It's really interesting, right? So these researchers looked at, they studied a whole bunch of different couples, right? And they recorded their behavior. And they went back to them, I don't know, like 10 years later or something, and looked to see which couples were still together 10 years later. And then looked back at the old videos to try and find out, well, what was special? What did those couples do differently to the couples that split up? And they found that those couples gave each other much more positive feedback and praise than they did negative. So it seems that this sort of ratio of about you need 7 times more praise than punishment or negative feedback isn't just for kids. It kind of runs through business and marriage and all kinds of human relationships.
Okay, it's interesting. I've never thought about it, like relate marriage into teaching young learners. Okay, it's quite different from what I experienced because go back to the summer course. I think I did like 50-50.
Yeah.
So I praised the kids and who behaved really well, and also punish the kids who didn't behave well.
Yeah.
But I did notice sometimes they were really demotivated.
But I think this is this thing where you have to focus on the behavior, not focus on the student, right? So what you just said was I praised the students who behaved really well and punished the students that didn't behave very, very well. Whereas I think, it's like anything. You have to set realistic goals for people. So if you've got like one student who's really restless and finds it difficult to keep quiet or something, or write or focus, and that student manages to focus for 3 minutes or something, then you want to praise that behavior, right? Because that person's done a good job for them. Does that make sense? So like focusing on the behavior, not focusing on the individual students.
Okay.
So you're not trying to change the bad students into good students. You're just trying to find positive behavior in every single person and encourage that positive behavior.
Okay. All right. Cool. I also want to share you one story, and I observed the TKT practical. So one KISS teacher, she taught a class, and there were maybe 10 students around 6 or 7 years old. And there was a boy really, really, really naughty.
Yeah.
So he just did exactly the opposite what the teacher said for maybe the first half of the class.
Yeah.
And then at some point, he was so motivated and interested in the topic and wanted to answer the questions. But I was so surprised. The teacher just said to him in front of everyone, said, "Oh, okay, no, you can't answer the question because you didn't."
And how was he answering the question? Was he putting his hand up or was he
Yeah, I just put hands up. And the teacher just ignored him. And he was so eager to answer the question and just I think he stood up and tried to, show his hand just in front of the teacher's eyes. But teacher said something like, no, you can't answer the question because you didn't behave well before.
Yeah. So I think what the teacher's doing there, right, is she's punishing the person rather than punishing the behavior. You know what we were saying earlier, right? Like so you want the student to be well behaved, and then the student does put up their hand. So that's an opportunity to give him attention and like show him like, if you behave well like this, then I'm going to give you attention and let you be part of the class. Right? But she didn't do that.
Yeah.
Right? So when he was being well behaved, she ignored him, which is the worst thing that you can do. Well, I think the phrase is like, try and catch the students doing something right.
So for that case, what would you do at that moment? I mean, you clearly know the students did something wrong before and he wanted to answer the question. How would you balance it?
So you can answer I would say, if you sit down, put up your hand, then you can answer the question. Yeah, and then praise him for, trying to be involved in the class. Because I think if you can make someone feel good about themselves, then they want to have that experience again. It sounds like she had this opportunity for him to participate in the class, get something correct maybe, and feel good about himself. And then he would want to try and repeat that behavior to get the same feeling again. But she completely missed that and just made him feel bad. What, you said he cried afterwards or something?
He cried. And just kept silent for the rest of the class.
Yeah, right.
And I felt awful when I was sitting there.
Yeah.
But my question is, because I really didn't know if you had this kind of experience before, and if for this kid, right, you did what you just talked about, and you focus on the good behavior, and still he kept doing what he did at the beginning, and there's no clear evidence, and he changed his behavior. So what would you do differently, or would you try some other techniques?
I think you also have to have realistic expectations of kids, right? And like, kids aren't going to be perfectly behaved all of the time. Otherwise, they wouldn't be kids, right? We could send them off to work when they were 5, right?
But do you think a lot of teachers, they don't have this clear expectations of kids before they start teaching?
I don't know. I mean, I think you're always going to have kids will be badly behaved because kids don't know how to behave. But I think you also have to show them, I think it's this thing of, okay, so you have to reinforce the positive behavior, but you also have to set rules and set expectations for the students. So here's another problem, I think, right? So, you've worked in a middle school before, and I've worked in middle schools and primary schools before with big classes of 30 or 60 students. And then also in private language schools where it's maybe 15 students and then even 5 students, right, with really young kids. And you have kids will go between these different contexts and the rules change, right? Like how you behave in a middle school, in China, right? How you behave in Chinese primary school, what you can do there and what you can do in a private language school is quite different, right? In a private language school, there's often lots of running around and games and things. And then you can't do that in a Chinese primary school,
right?
Definitely,
yeah.
So I think for the kids, it's also kind of confusing because they're in they're all in classrooms, right? But the rules keep changing. And then sometimes the teacher changes and one teacher has a rule that you have to put your hand up or, you have to stand up when you answer a question and another teacher doesn't. And you know what I mean? So there's all these different rules. And I think it's we have to keep reminding the kids, these are what the rules are and coming to some sort of agreement with the kids on what you can do and what you can't do.
Yeah, I totally agree with you because I taught in middle school in China and I took this class. So they had different experience with different teachers. So the first thing I did, the first week, really set up expectations and to tell them, okay, what the rules are in the classroom. Even they are older students, maybe 14 or 15 years old, I still think it's relevant to what you are talking about today.
I think it's not even just relevant for them, right? So I can remember before when I worked in a school, it was someone's last day, right? And I told the school cashier, go out, spend 100 kwai, buy some flowers, some chocolate, and a card, right? And then we'll get everyone together at the end of the day and, have a little party for this person because I forgot. And afterwards, my boss gave me a really hard time. She was really angry that I didn't ask her permission first before I did that, right? And then I had another boss later on, and I can't remember, I helped someone with something and spent 2 or 3 hours organizing a webinar. And afterwards I said to him, I'm sorry, I really should have asked your permission. And he said, you don't be an idiot. We're part of a team. We're meant to help each other.
Okay.
So I think it's interesting that even in business, right, different managers have different expectations of their employees or, how you should communicate with them. So I think it's not just that kids get confused with their teachers and what the teachers expect of them in terms of behavior. It's employees get confused with their
I really like how you can relate it to, different group of people.
I think you have to be able to empathize, right, with the kids and what they're going through. Because I think, at least you've probably had the same thing. You've worked for different managers, right?
Yeah.
And everyone has slightly different rules and different ways of working.
Okay, so Ross, if you want to give 3 pieces of advice.
3, wow.
to the new teachers who really don't have much teaching experience before, what would you like to tell them?
The first thing we're talking about, which is if you've got 10 students in the class and 9 of them are being badly behaved, find the student who's being well behaved and praise them. That would be the first one. The second one's that thing of setting rules and making sure that everyone's got realistic expectations. And then the last thing, which we didn't really get around to talking about so much, is don't let the students get bored. I don't know about you, but for I think 90% at least of the classes I've seen with kids where the students are badly behaved, the reason they're badly behaved is because they're bored, right? The classes are boring. We see this all the time with adults, right?
Yeah.
Most of the time when adults are playing on their phones or whatever, is because the class is boring. So make sure that you're always doing something that your students are interested in. And if your students do get bored and misbehave, then don't go out of class and go, oh, what a horrible group of students I have, or they're so stupid, or they're so badly behaved. Maybe go and think, well, what could I have done to make that class more interesting and made sure that the students were engaged and stayed on topic?
Okay. Yeah, thanks very much. And really interesting conversation.
Thanks. I thought so too.